Yeah.
All right, welcome everyone. We're letting a few more folks in. We'll get started in just a few seconds. Looks like everyone's in from the waiting room, but folks might kind of join throughout the presentation. So we'll continue to let people in, but it's noon, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I am Ada Dorch, Director of Development and Advocacy with Impact Northwest. We're happy to host this presentation from the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and I'd like to welcome Brooke. Really great that you're here, accepted our invitation, taking the time out from Washington, D.C. She's going to give us about 15-20-minute presentation she has on affordable housing problem solutions in your voice. And then we do have time for question and answers at the end. Everyone's muted, but we're happy to unmute you if you have a question or accept questions in the chat as well. So a little bit about Brooke. Brooke Schipporeit is the Director of Field Organizing and oversees the National Low Income Housing Coalition's field outreach, organizing, and advocate mobilization efforts. Thank you, Brooke, for being here. I'm going to pass it to you for your presentation.
Thank you so much. I was having issues with sharing my screen, but it looks like it's up there now. So hopefully you all can see that. Thank you so much for having me, and good afternoon, everyone. I think it just hit afternoon on your side of the country. So hope you're all doing well and appreciate you all taking the time to join today. I'm so excited to be with you and to discuss affordable housing, like Ada said, the underlying issues, solutions, and why your voice matters in our efforts to advance housing justice. So today I will be going over, sorry, I'm working with two screens here. Today I'll be going over who NLIHC is, what the data tells us, what the solutions are, and then we'll wrap up with a brief discussion on advocacy and some of the tools that we have at NLIHC for you all to participate. I'll be running through this all fairly quickly. I know you all have very busy schedules, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions at the end. So just think of this as kind of the beginning of an ongoing conversation. We're always happy to connect with folks. So the National Low Income Housing Coalition, our mission is to achieve racially and socially equitable public policy that ensures renters with the lowest incomes have quality, accessible, affordable homes in communities of their choice. And we work towards this mission by producing research that demonstrates the need, educating the public and policymakers, and mobilizing our nationwide network to participate in federal advocacy to advance solutions. Even though our mission is a bit narrower than some of the other national housing policy groups, as we focus specifically on renters and more specifically on the lowest income renters, we do have a large umbrella of groups involved in our work, including, tenant leaders, housing providers, researchers, property management groups, you name it. If it has to do with housing or homelessness, we probably have someone represented there. And within that coalition, we have over 1,000 dues-paying members, both individuals and organizations. And our role on the field team is to make it as easy as possible for people like you to engage in federal housing policy in our advocacy work. So, what I'm going to be talking about is kind of the problem, lay out some data, what some of the solutions are, and how we can advance those. So talking about the problem to get us started, the market on its own cannot build and maintain homes affordable to the lowest income households. Wages have not kept pace with the cost of housing, and Congress has been severely underfunding affordable housing programs for decades. Good advocacy lays out both the problem and its solutions, and NLIHC has a lot of great data, graphics, and other tools to make this easy for you. So let's start with the key data outlining the affordable housing crisis. The GAP is one of our 2 annual reports. Some of you may be familiar with it. It quantifies the shortage of affordable homes and repeatedly demonstrates that the greatest burden falls on the lowest income households. As you see on this map, there's no state or major metropolitan area where there is a sufficient supply of homes. This year's report demonstrates that there are only 34 affordable and available rental homes for every 100 extremely low-income renter households. So those are the lowest income households. And it's important to note that this doesn't even capture the over 600,000 people experiencing homelessness just because of our data source. Another important note for this chart is that the shortages are cumulative from lowest income to highest. So the apparent shortage for renters with incomes on the higher end can actually be explained by the significant shortage of affordable and available rental homes for those with the lowest incomes. In the private market, higher income households can occupy homes, of course, affordable to lower income households, and many do. And this leaves extremely low income renters to compete with all higher income households for the limited number of rental homes that are affordable to them in the private market. On the flip side, extremely low income renters who are severely cost burdened are living in housing that would otherwise be available to higher income renters who could live in this housing without being cost burdened. So you'll often hear of folks suggesting that we need to build at higher income levels and that will trickle down. Our data really shows that we need to build up rather than trickle down. And so an increased supply of deeply affordable homes for extremely low income renters actually ends up freeing up housing for higher income renters. So this is why we advocate for federal housing investments to be targeted to extremely low income renters who face the greatest shortage and the most severe cost burdens. This shortage, of course, leaves low income renter households with no choice but to live in homes that they can't afford. Almost 3/4 of our country's 11 million extremely low income renter households are severely cost burdened, meaning they spend more than half of their incomes on rent and utilities. And of course, depending on your background, the type of work you all do, I'm sure you see this. This leaves very little, if anything, for other necessities like food and healthcare, and leaving them just one unexpected expense away from eviction and, in worst cases, homelessness. So what does this mean for Oregon? In Oregon, it's even worse with only 26 affordable and available rental homes for every 100 ELI renter households, shown in the middle chart here. The chart on the right demonstrates housing cost burdens by income group in your state, and the chart on the left demonstrates that in Oregon, and this is true across the country as well, most extremely low income renter households who can work do. For Oregon, almost a third are in the labor force, another almost third are seniors, and almost a quarter have a disability, proving that just getting a job really isn't an adequate solution here. At NLIHC, we also believe that housing justice is racial justice. So, because of our country's really deep history of structural racism and ongoing discrimination in the housing and labor market, Black, Latino, and Indigenous households are disproportionately likely to be renters and to be extremely low-income renters. So they're therefore disproportionately impacted by this shortage. Black households are 3 times more likely than white households to be renters with extremely low incomes, and Latino households are 2 times more likely. And as a result, they face higher results of housing cost burden than white renters, of course. Because stable housing is the foundation for a healthy life, these disparities in housing lead to lifelong disparities in health, education, economic mobility, and involvement in the criminal justice system. Our other key research report, Out of Reach, calculates the hourly housing wage that a renter must earn to afford a modest rental home, or fair market rent, as you may know that term. And year after year, this report really demonstrates that wages have not kept pace with housing costs. In fact, there's no state, metropolitan area, or county in the US where a full-time worker earning the minimum wage can afford a modest 2-bedroom rental home, and only 7% of counties nationwide can a full-time minimum wage worker afford a modest 1-bedroom home. Nationally, renters need to earn over $21 an hour to afford a 1-bedroom home, and over $25 for a 2-bedroom home. And in other words, which this data point always gets me, is the average minimum wage worker must work 96 hours a week to afford a 2-bedroom rental home, or 79 hours a week to afford a 1-bedroom. And again, for Oregon, it's a little higher where you all are. So, we try to make this overwhelming amount of data as digestible as possible and present it in a way that's relevant to you. So we have these Out of Reach fact sheets with a state level overview, and then there are additional pages that break it down by metropolitan area and county. So as you can see on this fact sheet, folks in Oregon need to make over $29 an hour to afford a modest 2-bedroom home, or work 84 hours a week at minimum wage. And in your area, it's even higher at over $35 an hour. Go back. So there's no sugarcoating these data points. The housing crisis is bleak, but we do already know what the solutions are. We just have to build the political will to advance them. So let's briefly talk about what those solutions are, then jump into advocacy. NLIHC's House Campaign is a policy agenda that aims to solve our nation's housing crisis. It recognizes that racist housing policies have led to our current system. And so it works to advance explicitly anti-racist policies to achieve the large-scale sustained investments and reforms necessary to ensure that renters with the lowest incomes have an affordable place to call home. The 4 policy solution areas we focus on are here on your screen. So expanding rental assistance to every eligible household to bridge the gap between incomes and housing costs, because today only 1 in 4 households eligible for rental assistance actually receive it. The second one is expanding and preserving the supply of homes for people with the lowest incomes. This includes increased investments through the federal budget in project-based rental assistance and public housing, reforming the low-income housing tax credit program to better serve the lowest income households, and investing in the National Housing Trust Fund. The third is to create a National Housing Stabilization Fund that provides one-time assistance to households facing a financial crisis, like an unexpected medical bill or car repair, so that they can remain stably housed. And lastly, the 4th pillar is to address the power imbalance between renters and landlords by strengthening and enforcing renter protections. So here we have our top priorities listed for the year. Every year we advocate for the highest possible funding for affordable housing and homelessness programs in the federal budget. This year we have the chance to build support on 2 bipartisan bills. The Eviction Crisis Act, which you all may be particularly interested in given your work on homelessness prevention. This bill would create a permanent fund to help families facing an unexpected financial crisis, like I mentioned, as one of our pillars in the House campaign. And this would be a one-time payment to keep them stably housed. We had this introduced a few years ago, and we expect it to be reintroduced sometime this summer. The other bipartisan bill is the Family Stability and Opportunity Vouchers Act, which would create 250,000 more housing choice vouchers for families with young children to move to areas of greater opportunity. The Fair Housing Improvement Act would expand the Fair Housing Act to protect housing discrimination based on source of income, as well as military and veteran status. And we're working closely with Congress and the administration to advance additional renter protections at the federal level. And then finally, we're working alongside our national partners and state and local groups to push back on harmful legislation that would criminalize people experiencing homelessness simply for being homeless. I'm sure you all have heard about the Supreme Court case on this issue that was heard last week, since it came out of your state. A decision will come in June, but whatever the court decides, it's important for us to remember that a win is still not a win. We need these solutions in the first 4 bullets to prevent and end homelessness, and we need you to join us. So that brings us to advocacy. Advocacy is, of course, when you provide information about an issue and encourage support for your cause. Anyone can advocate, even if you feel like you're not a political person or an expert or feel far too removed from the policymaking process. I'm here to tell you that advocacy works and your voice really does matter. It's especially important in the federal policy making because Congress has the biggest pot of money, and this will be needed to advance solutions at the scale that is needed. So we often hear questions and comments like, well, I know my senator is never going to become a champion on affordable housing, or they already support these issues. But it's important for you to remember that your role is not to take someone from being on one side of this diagram all the way to the other, but rather to move them even just an inch to the right for solutions or to the left for harmful policies. Even if they're a housing supporter, they need to know to keep it up. And when we're all doing this collectively, we move the needle on advancing solutions. A recent advocacy success story is really from the pandemic, when thousands of people across the country joined us and successfully pushed Congress to provide billions of dollars for emergency rental assistance and prevented what we were expecting was going to be a tsunami of evictions when so many people were losing hours at work or their jobs altogether. And as constituents, your views play a larger role in elected officials' policy choices and votes than you might think. Not only do you have expertise on these issues through your work and personal lives, but you also have the ability to vote and to keep them in office or to kick them out. So by sharing your views, you can play a central role in either reinforcing or shifting their thinking on issues. And advocacy can be as simple as taking 5 minutes to call or email your members of Congress and telling them you're a constituent that cares about protecting and expanding affordable housing, or getting really deeply involved in an advocacy campaign, which can involve any number of these activities. Whatever you have the time and energy for at a given point is perfectly fine and welcomed. Even if federal advocacy is not your organization's bread and butter, at NLIHC, our role is to make it as easy as possible for you to plug in and have an impact on federal policymaking. And many of our tools and resources that we have available can be transferable to state and local advocacy as well. So we do have a lot of tools to help. We have a weekly e-newsletter, regular webinars, calls to action delivered to your inbox, a variety of publications and advocacy toolkits, resources for nonpartisan election engagement, and a legislative action center at the QR code on the screen, which I'm happy to share this PowerPoint afterwards so that it can be shared out to the group. This QR code is our legislative action center that where you can directly contact members of Congress about our various policy priorities. And we have very easy toolkits available, like sample emails and phone calls, scripts and stuff there. You can also become an NLIHC member at any amount that works for you or your organization to get special discounts and opportunities to weigh in on our policy issues. And lastly, I'll just say that we have field team members dedicated to one team member to a certain region of states. I am not that person, unfortunately, but we are hiring someone who is going to start on May 13th. His name is Thaddeus. And once he gets his feet under him, he can really serve as a really strong resource to you all on all of the things that we talked about today and more. So my call to action to you today is to lift up one of the solutions that we talked about to your members of Congress, with the goal of doing it maybe by the end, since May is already upon us, by the end of May. And pick which one is most relevant to you and to your work. So just pick one and to lift it up to your members of Congress. To make that easier, pictured here is our most recent advocacy toolkit for the week of action that we had around the Supreme Court case last week. Even though the week of action is over, the same work continues, and we invite you all to join us and can use that as a relevant resource. And you can also go to our Legislative Action Center at NLIHC/take-action. I'll also drop the links to these two things in the chat when I finish up. So just pick one, write it down, take an action before the end of next month. And yeah, with that, I will see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Brooke. It's awesome. And really, thank you for also being open to sharing the slides. I think that was already a question coming through. So I'm happy to, if you want to email that to me and I'll get it out to the group as well. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so go ahead and raise your virtual hand and we can unmute you or put a question in the chat if you have any. It was very informative, so it's possible there aren't too many lingering questions, but Brooke's definitely open and here to answer anything you might have. One thing that came up for me, Brooke, while people are maybe thinking about a question, you shared the QR code and you talked a little bit about the Eviction Crisis Act. Are there tangible actions that we can find there that we can do on a local level that can help your advocacy on the federal level, especially around that Eviction Crisis Act?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think talking to your local elected officials about the role that maybe ERA, emergency rental assistance dollars or programs that you had locally, maybe lifting up some of the successes of that and talking about how this is needed beyond just the pandemic and longer term for those financial crises that pick up. And so maybe it's bringing them to a site visit of a housing program or a community center or something to talk with people who have been directly impacted, or maybe who can share a little bit more about their story and their experience with housing instability. And doing that can really drum up support for the federal level by looking at state and local efforts. We can lift up what has worked and lift that to our members of Congress and point to them and why this is needed across the country and not in a patchwork system. So that's kind of what we're doing with our state and local innovation team, is to really drum up that support at the state and local level.
Awesome, thank you. We have a lot of housing service providers on the call, so I think that'll be good to know, and then also potentially collaborate with Thaddeus with those stories that we can help share with those and elevate them. So see a couple hands. I'm just going to take them in the order that they came in. The first one is Yana. I'm unmuting you. Yana, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me? Sorry. Hi, Brooke, thank you so much. That was a very informative presentation. I'm Yana Hack. I work for Impact Northwest as a Director of Housing and Safety Net Services. And while I would like to look at the solutions and kind of like in the future what we can do, I think that we need to understand the roots before we get to that. So I was kind of taken back by the two graphs that you had with the map, one for the gap report and the one for the out of reach report. And I noticed that like those deep saturated colors were predominantly on the West Coast. And I was wondering, what are the reasons for that? Like, what is your data saying about the situation on the West Coast specifically?
Yeah,
Why?
it's a great question. Thank you for that. One thing comes to mind, which is when public housing was being built across the country, it made it so far west, but not all the way west, to be a predominant source of deeply affordable homes. So we've actually, I can't remember if we have done the research, because I'm not the one with the research hat, but or if it was someone else who did it. But it was like the East and Northeast has a lot more public housing, and they, as a result, have seen a lot, in many cases, a lot less with housing instability and cost burdens. So that's one thing I would raise. I think also just rapid growth and wage gaps contributes to that, and that might be a more predominant issue in some of those states as well.
Great, thank you. And Yana says thank you as well. So I think it answered Yana's question. Next one is Amy G. We'll unmute you, Amy.
Hi, Brooke. My name is Amy G, and I actually am on the board for Impact Northwest. And I am curious, where are you seeing places across the country where housing is working, where there are solutions that are actually being effective? And based on that, like, what are the opportunities of replicating those in other areas?
Oh, that's a good question, Amy. I will say that I think in many areas, we're seeing rental assistance working, whether it's tenant-based or, project, unit-based rental assistance. That is working, and those one-time emergency rental assistance payments as well, are also working in many places. The problem is that we do not have enough, we have not funded, Congress has underfunded for decades these programs, and so it's just a revolving door. So people are getting adequately housed, especially in those folks who are experiencing homelessness, and they're getting quickly put into housing with the options to opt into supportive resources that they might need. We see research shows that the folks in those situations that receive that rental assistance and those supports remain stably housed a year, 2 years afterwards. But then there's those folks who aren't receiving the rental assistance, who are on the brink of eviction and spending way more than is affordable on their rents, and that's when we're seeing homelessness and eviction numbers rise. So it's not that the solutions aren't working or that they're not there, it's that we just have not adequately funded the things we know that are working.
Thank you. Next question is from Laura. We'll go ahead and unmute you, Laura.
Thank you, Ada, and thanks, Brooke, for being here. Really appreciate all of the great work that National Low Income Housing Coalition does. I had a question about rent assistance and how we approach balancing the need for rent assistance in the form of housing choice vouchers, whether they're true HUD housing choice vouchers or locally funded, which we have in our community, which is awesome, and the need to have rent subsidies built into affordable buildings in the form of project-based vouchers. And I think we would all agree we need both. But is there data that helps us understand when tenants who have a housing choice voucher benefit from having that choice, and also data that supports the construction of more deeply affordable housing that comes with subsidized units, to sort of help us make the argument for both?
Yeah. I will look into that. It's funny you raised that question because we were literally just talking about it this morning, our team. Our policy team is doing some work around recommendations to Congress. Chairwoman Maxine Waters reached out with some of those same questions. And so our policy team is putting together kind of like where that makes sense, because it running it up against the 20% cap for project-based vouchers is true in some communities, but not in others, and definitely wanting to walk that balance of choice, but also having those deeply affordable, because I think, you know, we agree as well that it's both. But I don't know what the data is on, or if there is data on that, but I'll look into it and share what I can with you.
Thank you, Brooke. It looks like that might have been the last question coming through. Just double checking the chat here. Yeah. So any last words from you, Brooke? Yes, there you go.
Just sharing my contact info, please do reach out. I don't claim to know everything, but I'm always happy to search and find the right person to connect you with, or to gather that information, like Laura's question. So please do reach out, and hope that you all stay in touch.
Great, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Brooke. And we'll definitely be in touch with the slides from this presentation as well.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the day.